Celtic Mythology, Irish Myths and Ancient Folklore from the British Isles. Written by Bernard Hayes. Narrated by Zachary Dillon Brown. Introduction. Celtic mythology is rich in heroic stories, gods and goddesses, epic tales of love and betrayal together with elements of magic, spiritualism, and even occasional humor. Ireland is the richest source of these myths and legends. The reason is simply that it was isolated from mainland Europe for much of its history, and so the stories remained intact, free from pressures exerted by the cultures such as the Roman Empire. The legends derive from the stories and beliefs of people who occupied most of modern-day Europe to the north of Italy and the Alps for several thousand years BC. Who were the Celts? The Celts were members of people who spoke one of the Indo-European languages. They probably originated from Central Europe during the late 2nd millennium BC, late Bronze Age. Traces of their earliest existences can be found in Austria, Germany, and France. They established late Bronze/Iron Age culture called Hallstatt culture in Austria during the 9th or 8th century BC. When the Iron Age Hallstatt began to displace the Bronze Age Hallstatt, a rich, flourishing trade existed between the Greeks and the Celtic tribes living in the region of Bavaria to Bohemia. The Greeks called them Keltoi. The name has its roots probably in the 5th century BC, while the Romans called them Galli, which is the Gauls. A new Iron Age culture emerged during the 6th century BC, called Latin around the Rhine River. Latin introduced the distinctive style, which the Celtic arts were famous for. Swords and spear were found buried with their warriors. The Celtic society had become more warlike. Since 600 BC, a Greek colony in southern France had transformed into a prosperous city called Massilia, Marseille, because of its trades with the Gauls. The Gauls had adopted Greek writing system as a form of communication between them. It was during this period that the Celts in continental Europe reached the height of their power. It was the golden age of the Celtic people. They migrated as far west as Spain, and their boundaries stretched towards the east, settling in the region called Galata, in the Anatolia, Turkey, the southwest coast of the Black Sea. Sometime during the 6th century BC, they crossed the English Channel to the British Isles. The Celts who migrated to Britain became known as the Simic Celts. In Gaul, France, Belgium, and the Lowlands, over 20 different Celtic tribes were identified by the time of Caesar. Some of the Celts crossed the Pyrenees into Spain sometime between 8th to 6th century BC. The Celts settled mostly in the north and central Spain, as well as in Portugal. This pushed Iberians, the native people of Spain, into moving to east and southern Spain. Some of the Celts settled and intermingled with the Iberians, producing a group of people known as the Celtiberian tribes. During the 5th and 4th century BC, several Celtic tribes from the Transalpine Gaul, southern France, penetrated the Alps and settled around the region called Cisalpine Gaul, in northern Italy, north of the river Po. Cisalpine means the side of the Alps. The Senones were the first to arrive in Italy, followed by the Insubres, who settled in Lombardy. The Boii settled in a region Bologna. The migration of the Gauls from the north, putting pressure upon the Etruscan city-states Etruria, Tuscany, that allowed the Romans to conquer Etruscan neighbors. In 391 BC, the Gauls, Senones, under their chieftain Brennus, badly mauled the Roman army in Aelia. The following year, the Gauls had sacked Rome. Then the Gauls withdrew from Rome after killing and looting. According to the Roman tradition, an exiled Roman general named Marcus Furius Camillus gathered what was left of the Roman army, defeating and driving the Gauls out of Rome. More likely, the Gauls withdrew from Rome on their own accord and with no resistance from the Romans. During the 3rd century BC, Macedonia and Thessaly, northern Greece, were overrun by the Celts. The Celts penetrated further south, where they attacked and looted Delphi in 279 BC. When Germanic tribes began their migration during the 2nd century BC, the Celts were pressured and forced to seek refuges further west of the Rhine and south of the Danube. Julius Caesar spent much of his time in 59 to 50 BC with military campaigns in Gaul, France, and Belgium, creating a new Roman province. Because Gaul contained a number of tribes, the lack of strong leadership and unity, Caesar made great use of the military maxim, divide and conquer, to defeat each Gallic tribe. Caesar described in his memoirs, Gallic Wars, their warrior society, such as their customs and religion. Caesar admired his foes for their bravery and skills in warfare. The Gauls provided Caesar with the best source of cavalry. By the time Augustus, Caesar's great-nephew Octavian, had established a Roman Empire, he had divided Gaul into 3 different provinces, not including Narbonnese Gaul, southern France, which had been a Roman province since 121 BC, Aquitania, Lugudunensis, and Belgica, with Lugdunum, Lyons, as the capital. In Spain, the province was also divided into 3 separate provinces. In the west, comprising all of Portugal, was Lusitania, while in southern Spain was the province of Baetica, the valley of the river Baetis. These 2 provinces were originally known as Hispania Ulterior, further Spain. The rest was province of Hispania Criterior, nearer Spain, was called Tarraconensis. Caesar even crossed the English Channel for 2 years, 55 to 54 BC, where he encountered more Celtic people in southern Britain. Though Britain, Britannia, did not become a Roman province until Emperor Claudius between AD 43 to 51. Britain was largely divided into tribal regions, since the regions were named Belgae, Brigantes, and Catovallani, etc. The Catovallani and Atrebates were the most powerful Celtic tribes. Other tribes, who arrived later and settled in Wales and southern England, were from Belgica Gaul, such as the Belgae, Iceni, Parisi, and many others. Ancient Celtic culture. The ancient Celtic warriors engaged their enemy as if they would defeat them simply by overrunning them, trusting their brute force more than elaborate tactics and clever strategies. War and warfare definitely played an important role in their ancient society. The end of ancient Celtic culture came when Ireland was Christianized in the 5th century BC, followed by Scotland soon after. The word Druid, referring to the learned class in ancient Celtic society, may itself have come from the word for knowing or finding the oak tree, and their early gatherings took place in clearings in the forest. Although there is no direct connection between the Tree of Life motif, used to symbolize Christ in the illustrated manuscripts, and the importance of the tree to ancient Celtic Druids, it is interesting to speculate that the image, if not the concept, has resonated for centuries in Celtic thought and design. Their symbols are usually visual representations of many of their ancient customs and beliefs that date back to as early as 3000 BC. The Druids have a startling kinship with the Brahmins of the Hindu religion, and were, indeed, a parallel development from their common introduction European cultural route, which began to branch out probably 5,000 years ago. Ancient Celtic art has 2 distinctive styles. It has only been in recent decades scholars have begun to reveal the full extent of the parallels and cognates between ancient Celtic society and Vedic culture. They were the intellectual caste of this society, incorporating all the professions, judges, lawyers, medical doctors, ambassadors, historians, and so forth, just as does the Brahmin caste. There were 7 Celtic sea nations, or places where the ancient peoples lived on the shores of this ancient sea. Brittany, by the sea in northern France, is one of those ancient Celtic sea nations. Their philosophy indicates that existence arose from the interplay between darkness and light, night and day, cold and warmth, death and life, and that the passage of years was the alternation of dark periods winter, beginning November 1st, and light periods summer, starting May 1st. In mythology, while differing from area to area, centers on the concepts of nature, growth, and reproduction. Shannon was a goddess in ancient Celtic mythology, associated with the river Shannon, which is named after her. The search for wisdom was usually made by a woman who found it in a river or well. The magic cauldron of ancient Celtic mythology becomes the Holy Grail. 3 was a sacred number in ancient Celtic mythology and religion. The connection between elves and the hill on which Cortrian is built recalls the importance of green hills in ancient Celtic mythology, where they were regarded as the entrance to the Sidhe, the other world where the immortals dwell. Celtic mythology: 7 ways to a wonderful life. Let me count the ways. There are 7 in all. 1. Celtic mythology deepens the connection to the eternal. Many people today seek to find meaning in life through genealogy. A deeper connection is available by embracing the stories within your personal cultural heritage. All cultures have mythological stories that will connect you to the heart of your belonging. This connection is not only timely, but it is also timeless. 2. Celtic mythology honors the divine. Ours is a society which is work-obsessed. We have become a species that does life rather than live life. Real life includes the balance between the masculine and feminine. When these types of energy are in harmony, then life is wonderful. Celtic mythology deeply honors both the masculine and feminine and helps you experience this unity. 3. Celtic mythology allows you to cross thresholds. You live in 2 worlds and know only one. Celtic mythology allows you to enter the magical and miraculous world of the timeless. It allows you to journey in the world of the heart beyond past, present, and future. It takes you places beyond belief into the wonderful world of your creative imagination. You become the flow of creation. 4. Celtic mythology embraces love of the body. In Celtic mythology, there is a love of that which is sensual. It teaches one to honor the body and allows you to live a sensational life. This goes beyond common sense and embracing delight in sexual love and sensual love. 5. Celtic mythology gets you out of your head. Most of the time we think about living our lives. Celtic mythology reminds us that we are beings in nature. We are not simply logic shoppers who spend most of our lives thinking about the future and regretting the past. Celtic mythology invites you to embrace the moment and become a wondrous presence. It is, in a sense, totally illogical. 6. Celtic mythology encourages you to be a hero or heroine. Celtic mythology tells us we can be heroes even just for one day. We can learn to embrace our unique talents. We can journey in this world and learn to move beyond limitation. It shows us how we can learn to cross the thresholds of magic and mystery at the rising of each new day. We can enter dark places and become enlightened. 7. Celtic mythology allows you to be you. Celtic mythology embraces the beauty of words and the deep silence between words. The poet was honored above all else. Theirs was the language that transformed. Theirs was the language that allowed you to see that the blessing is here, and you are it. Conan MacMorna. Conan is the brother of Goll MacMorna, Fionn's great rival in the Fianna. He was fondly nicknamed Conan Maol for his bald head. He was also known as Malachtan, which means insulter, as he often voiced how great he was, how deserving of respect and adulation, and how nobody else fared well by comparison. It is clear that throughout the years, the Byacene clan is painted in better light than the Morna clan, with members of the Morna clan often depicted as having some major character flaws. Conan is no different. He displays a great lack of tact and delicacy, often acting as a bit of a troublemaker within the Fianna, cutting quite a comical buffoonish figure at times with his blustering ways. He is fat, greedy, and ostensibly favors the members of the Morna clan. He is, however, very loyal to Fionn, and will never run from a fight. In fact, within the Fianna he is most valued for his quarrelsome nature. They appreciated that he was always first into the fray of any fight. He never held back in defense of any of his brother, though they may be from the Byacene clan. At one point, Fionn suggested that he should take the blackthorn as his totem plant, as the uncompromising, stubborn, and prickly nature of the plant resembled his nature, but that occasionally it could blossom with masses of pure white flowers, brightening the entire plant. There was a great feeling of tolerance toward his behavior among the Fianna, as they all understood that it was just his way, and that he meant nothing by it. Stories of Conan. On one occasion, when out hunting, the Fianna sought shelter in a cave. They slept well, but each man woke to find that they had been put under a spell, and that they were stuck to the ground. Kaidi, who had spent the night running with animals, came to the cave and found them in this state. He released them by pouring magical water between their skin and the ground. Unfortunately, by the time he arrived at Conan, the water had run out. Fionn and Gol caught Conan by his wrists and heaved him off the ground with all their strength. As he was released from the ground, Conan let out a big roar, as all of the skin on his back was torn off him. The Fianna laid him down, killed a sheep, skinned it, and pressed the raw hide to Conan's back. This succeeded in replacing his lost skin. The Fianna sheared his back regularly, and the black, glossy curls of his back were used to make a new jacket and trousers for his each year. Having to suffer this indignity is one explanation for his ready temper, and for his need to bolster up his position with the Fianna. Conan is a bit of a diamond in the rough. He is lucky that he is well understood by the members of the Fianna. His brothers know to take his roughness in good nature, as they know that beneath that bluster and the insults lies a true-hearted member of their tribe. He will always end up with his foot in his mouth, however, and when his protests at his own greatness go too far, he is often brought down to earth by one of the others. He can be misunderstood by the people who don't know him that well. 4 cycles of Irish mythology. Many of the Irish legends are made up of stories about adventures, great battles, voyages, invasions, and gods. But today, we categorize them into 4 main cycles: the mythological cycle, the Finn cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the historical cycle. The mythological cycle. The mythological cycle of Irish legends is made up of stories about former gods and the origins of the Irish. One of the most popular stories from the mythological cycle would be Children of Lear, a tragic story of a stepmother jealous over 4 children that she had turned into swans. Other stories from this cycle include The Wooing of Etain, Cath Maige Turida, and The Dream of Aengus. Although the mythological cycle is the least preserved out of all the Irish legend cycles, sources can be found in metrical Dinshinchas, or Lore of Places, and the Libor Gabala Arin, or Book of Invasions. The Fenian cycle. The Fenian cycle is also referred to as Finn cycle or Fenian tales, and were stories based around the Irish mythical hero Fionn Mac Cumhaill and his warriors, Fianna Éireann. The Fianna Éireann were warriors who lived in forests as mercenaries, bandits, and hunters. People also refer to the Fenian cycle as the Ossianic cycle, as Fionn Mac Cumhaill's son, Oisin, was supposed to have written most of the poems found in that cycle. The famous story of Salome of Wisdom is part of the Fenian cycle. This is when Fionn is admitted to the court of the High Kings at Tara after passing 3 major tests, which then he became the leader of Clan Baskna. Fionn Mac Cumhaill went on to be the leader of the Fianna Éireann after killing a goblin by the name of Eilean Mac Migna. Samhain Eilean would terrorize the people on the hill of Tara by playing music on his harp, leaving every warrior helpless. Fionn used a magic spear that left him immune to the music and killed the goblin. The Ulster cycle. The Ulster cycle is about legends and heroes of Ulaid, Eastern Ulster, and Northern Leinster. They are written in manuscripts from the medieval period, but some early stories can be dated to the early Christian period in Ireland. Events in the Ulster cycle are said to have taken place during the time of Christ, with some historians believing the Ulster cycle to be historical, when others believe they were actually purely mythical. The most important story of the Ulster cycle was the Cattle Raid of Cooley. The story tells of a war against Ulaid, Ulster, by the Queen Connacht Med Med and her husband Ailill. They set out to steal a stud bull by the name of Don Quillinge. There is also Deirdre of the Sorrows that tells a story of beauty, lust, and the death of Ireland's most beautiful woman. Historical cycle. During the medieval period in Ireland, professional poets, bards, would record the history of the family or king they served. They did this in poems mixed with mythology and history, resulting in stories that make up the historical cycles. Stories from the historical cycle included high kings such as Lebraid Longsec or Brian Boru, and also included stories such as the Frenzy of Sweeney. Living myths. Prior to Roman or Christian influence, the Celts preferred to pass on their sacred teachings and myths orally. After the coming of Christianity in the 5th century onwards, the monks recorded the myths. It is thanks to them that so many survive today. Wouldn't Christian monks have qualms about recording pagan tales? Apparently not. St. Patrick, who brought Christianity to Ireland in 432, had his doubts about the old stories until he received a vision in which he was told to respect and record them. Deities. Some of the myths have been Christianized, especially those recorded in Wales. However, a particular feature of Celtic myths may have prevented this from happening more often, namely, the way in which deities have been anthropomorphized, given human form, so that, unlike Greek myths, they are not obviously religious in nature. This feature may have made them seem less threatening to the new belief of Christianity. The god Lugh. We can see this anthropomorphization clearly with the god Lugh, who gives his name to the Irish summer festival of Lunasada. In the earliest Irish myths, he is clearly a deity. As such, he offers himself as the savior of the Tuatha De Danann, the predecessors of the Milesians or Gaels. Seeking entry at the palace of King Nuada of the Silver Hand, at Tara, he announces each of his skills in turn: blacksmith, warrior, musician, poet, scholar. Each time he is refused entry, until he points out that no one else combines all these skills in one person, as he does. In the Mabinogion, the main source of British myths, Lugh has become the much more human Lugh Laugifs, nephew, and possibly son, of the magician Gwydion. He is skilled and protected by charms, but he is not obviously a god. In fact, at one point he appears to be mortal. The Dagda, father of the gods. Lugh shares some characteristics with the Dagda, a larger-than-life figure prominent in myths of the Tuatha De Danann. Like Lugh, he is powerful and omnicompetent. Yet, he is often represented as a rather comic figure whose short tunic fails to cover his buttocks, and whose huge club has to be carried on wheels. The Dagda has great magical powers, and he possesses a harp which comes to him when he calls, and a cauldron of abundance which restores dead warriors to life, but without powers of speech, perhaps in case they say too much about the afterlife. Goddesses. Powerful though these gods were, the Celtic goddesses were perhaps even more so. They were closely associated with the land, and in this identification they sometimes seem to be aspects of a single all-embracing goddess. Their link to the seasonal cycles, to fertility and death, may partly account for the fact that a single goddess often takes 3 forms, or aspects, usually maiden, mother, and crone. Celtic goddesses could be life-giving and sustaining, but were also, in their dark aspect, associated with sex and death, which in Celtic terms are part of the round of life. The most powerful Irish example is the red-headed shape-shifting Morrigan, said to have coupled with the Dagda. Sources of the myths. The surviving Celtic myths come from Scotland and Ireland, which were at one time closely related, from Wales, though many of these originally orally further east, and from Brittany. No myths survive from Romanized areas, such as Gaul on the continent. They do not appear to have been written down in Latin. Tales of the Ossianic Cycle. Faniacht, Fenian cycle, refers to the stories centered on the legendary character Finn McCumail, his fan, warrior band, his son Oisfin, and his grandson Oscar. From the earliest literary attestation in the 7th century among the Lane, cultivation of this material spread and became associated in the Old Irish period with places as far apart as South Tipperary, West Cork, the Midlands, and East Ulster. Classified by modern scholars as one of the 4 medieval Irish literary cycles, along with the Ulster cycle, the cycle of historical tales, or cycle of the kings, and the mythological cycle, it emerged from fragmentarily documented beginnings to become the dominant literary genre of the post-Norman period in Ireland. The warrior band, an institution with Indo-European roots, was an integral part of medieval Irish society, occupying an important position on its boundaries. Some scholars have argued, however, that the Tan's existence on the margins of society contributed to the early literary neglect of Faniacht material by Christian redactors and scribes who wished to discourage warrior bands and associated practices. The lack of relevance of this material to a society obsessed with history and genealogy is another reason cited for its initial lack of cultivation. Its rise in popularity in the post-Norman period has been attributed to a lessening of church opposition to the genre and its adaptability to changing literary tastes. Similar to the figure of Arthur in Britain, the cult of Finn grew from its localized beginnings to spread throughout Ireland and the rest of the Gaelic-speaking world. During this process, particularly under the influence of the synthetic historians in the 10th and 11th centuries, a position was found for Finn and his Tan in the historical and literary record. They were often portrayed as the standing army of King Cormac mac Airt, defending Ireland in the 3rd century against foreign invasion, often from a base at Seenach Eilean, in Lane territory. Fenian lays and ballads began to be composed at least as early as the 11th century, and these became the dominant literary form of the tradition from the late medieval period onward. The two most important extant ballad connections are those preserved in the 16th century Scottish manuscript, the Book o' the Dean o' Lismore, and the 17th century Droinéir Finn, compiled among the Irish exiles in Ostend, Belgium. The fame of Fenian balladry had spread all over Europe by the 19th century, thanks to James Macpherson. He published 3 works in the 1760s that purported to be translations of the epic poems written by Finn's son, Oisfin, in Macpherson's spelling, Ossian. These translations were, in the main, creations of his own imagination, although they were partly based on genuine ballad tradition. From Macpherson's Ossian, the term Ossianic emerged, a word that is still occasionally used to refer to the cycle as a whole and to the ballad tradition in particular. Prose material was also extensively cultivated and includes the Middle Irish texts Tóch Mar Gaiba and Mac Fimrada Find, the later Fís Tí Conin, and the very well-known Toriacht Dimada Agus Gerain, a classic example of the love triangle. The central text in Faniac tradition, however, is Alcum na Sinarach, the Colloquy of the Ancients, recently translated by Julian Rowe. This long tale that focuses, inter alia, on the accommodation reached between the native and Christian traditions features the encounters between St. Patrick and the last surviving Fenian warriors, most notably Cafit. In this framed tale, the journey of saint and warrior around 5th century Ireland is recounted, and the different moral codes of the Tan and the Church are compared, contrasted, and ultimately harmonized. It is a veritable treasure trove of Faniac material, described by Murphy as a reservoir into which a brilliant late 12th century innovator had diverted several streams of tradition which previously had normally flowed in separate channels. The single largest medieval Irish text, it was written in approximately 1200 in prose interspersed with poetry, the prosametrum form so favored in Irish tradition. The human and mythic characteristics of Finn mac Cumaill are very fully documented in Faniac's tradition. These range from comparisons with Lugh with the Welsh Gwyn ap Nudd, to Finn's role of seer in the early literature, to the magical and supernatural environment that surrounds Finn, his Tan, and his family in the later material. His attractiveness to an audience is ensured, however, by his continual presentation as a character with all too human qualities and failings. We see him as an unsympathetic and isolated youth, a successful and a spurned lover, a wise and learned poet, a jealous and embittered old man, and a strong and vigorous hunter-warrior. Thus, he reflects many aspects of the human condition. The complexity of character, coupled with repeated evocation of the beauties of nature, the clever use of Dinchinchus, place-name lore, and the recurring presence of magic and the supernatural have combined to place Faniac at the very heart of Irish culture, as is still the case in the modern folk tradition. The coming of Finn. And now we tell how Finn came to the captaincy of the Fianna of Éireann. At this time, Ireland was ruled by one of the mightiest of her native kings, Conn, son of Phelemy, who was surnamed Conn of the 100 Battles, and Conn sat in his great banqueting hall at Tara while the yearly assembly of the lords and princes of the Gael went forward, daring which it was the inviolable law that no quarrel should be raised and no weapon drawn, so that every man who had a right to come to that assembly might come there and sit next to his deadliest foe in peace. Below him sat at meat the provincial kings and the chiefs of clans, and the high kings, officers, and fighting men of the Fianna, with Gol and the sons of Morna at their head. And there too sat modestly a strange youth, tall and fair, whom no one had seen in that place before. Conn marked him with the eye of a king that is accustomed to mark men, and by he sent him a horn full of wine from his own table, and bade the youth to declare his name and lineage. "I am Finn, son of Cumail," said the youth, standing among them, tall as a warrior's spear, and a start and a low murmur ran through the assembly, while the captains of the Fianna stared upon him like the men who see a vision of the dead. "What seek you here?" said Conn, and Finn replied, "To be your man, O king, and to do your service in war as my father did." "It is well," said the king. "Thou art a friend's son, and the son of a man of trust." So Finn put his hand in the king's, and swore fealty and service to him, and Conn set him beside his own son Art, and all fell to talking again, and wondering what new things that day would bring forth, and the feasting went merrily forward. Now, at this time, the people of the royal burg of Tara were sorely affected by a goblin of the fairy folk, who was wanting to approach the place at nightfall, there to work what harm to man or beast or dwelling that he found in his evil mind to do. And he could not be resisted, for as he came he played on a magic harp a strain so keen and sweet that each man who heard it must needs stand entranced and motionless until the fairy music had passed away. The king proclaimed a mighty reward to any man who could save Tara from the goblin, and Finn thought in his heart, "I am the man to do that." So he said to the king, "Shall I have my rightful heritage as captain of the Fianna of Erin if I slay the goblin?" Conn said, "I promise thee that," and he bound himself by the sureties of all the provincial kings of Ireland, and of the druid Kithro and his magicians. Now there was among the following of Conn a man named Fiacha, who had been as a youth a trusty friend and follower of Cumail. He came to Finn and brought with him a spear having a head of dark bronze with glittering edges, and fastened with 30 rivets of Arabian gold, and the spear head was laced up within a leathern case. "By this weapon of enchantment," said Fiacha, "you shall overcome the enchanter," and he taught Finn what to do with it when the hour of need should come. So Finn took the spear, and left the strings of the case loose, and he paced with it towards nightfall around the ramparts of royal Tara. And when he had once made the circuit of the rampart, and the light had now almost quite faded from the summer sky, and the wide, low plains around the hill of Tara were a sea of white mist, he heard far off in the deepening gloom the first notes of the fairy harp. Never had such music been made by mortal hand, for it had in it sorrows that man had never felt, and joys for which man had no name. And it seemed as if a man listening to that music might burst from time into eternity, and be as one of the immortals for evermore. And Finn listened, amazed and rapt, till at last as the triumphant melody grew nearer and louder, he saw dimly a shadow shape playing, as it were, on a harp, and coming swiftly towards him. Then, with a mighty effort, he roused himself from dreams, and tore the cover from the spearhead and laid the metal to his brow. And the demonic energy that had been beaten into the blade by the hammers of unearthly craftsmen in ancient days thrilled through him and made him fighting mad, and he rushed forward, shouting his battle cry and swinging the spear aloft. But the shadow turned and fled before him, and Finn chased it northward to the fairy mound of Slieve Fuad, and there he drove the spear through its back. And what it was that fell there in the night, and what it was that passed like the shadow of a shadow into the fairy mound, none can tell. But Finn bore back with him the next day a pale, sorrowful head on the point of Fiacha's spear, and the goblin troubled the folk of royal Tara no more. But Conn of the 100 Battles called the Fianna together, and he set Finn at his right hand and said, "Here is your captain by birthright and by sword right. Let who will now obey him henceforward, and who will not, let him go in peace, and serve Arthur of Britain, or Arist of Alba, or whatsoever king he will." And Gol, son of Morna, said, "For my part I will be Finn's man under thee, O king," and he swore obedience and loyalty to Finn before them all. Nor was it hard for any man to step where Gol had gone before, so they all took their oaths of Fian, service to Finn mac Cumhail. And thus it was that Finn came to the captaincy of the Fianna of Erin, and he ruled the Fianna many a year till he died in battle with the clan Ergrin, at Bree upon the Boyne. The Fianna of Erin. Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn was an ancient Gaelic hero who was endowed with superhuman qualities. His name means the Hound of Culainn, but he was first called Setanta. His parents were Dector and Lugh Lamphta, Lugh of Long Hand, pronounced Lugh Levwada. At the age of 5, he left home to join the Red Branch of Knights, the Ulster army of the King Conor MacNessa. With him he took his hurley, his silver ball, his javelin, and his spear. He would hit the silver ball with the hurley, leap forward and hit it a second time before it touched the ground, toss the javelin ahead, and then the spear, run after them all, catch the ball and javelin with one hand, and the spear with the other. When he reached the palace at Emain Macha, he beat 150 boys at hurling and other games. Cuchulainn achieved his name at the age of 7 when he killed the watchdog of Ulster, belonging to Culainn, the smith, and in return undertook to protect the kingdom of Ulster and its people himself. Cuchulainn became the leader of the Red Branch Knights. In battle, he was transformed by a battle fury, which looked like this. From head to toe, his whole body trembled like a bulrush in a river torrent. His body turned right around inside his skin so that his heels, calves, and hams appeared in front. One of his eyes drew right back in his head, the other stood out huge and red on his cheek. His mouth was distorted, twisted up to his ears so you could see his throat, and a man's head would fit into it. His hair stood up on his head like hawthorn, and there was a drop of blood on every single hair. The light of the champion stood out of his forehead, as long and thick as a warrior's whetstone, and from the top of his head rose a thick column of dark blood like the mast of a huge ship. When this happened, the only way he could be calmed down was by being ducked 3 times in cold water. During his lifetime, he made a number of enemies, and one of these, Queen Maeve of Connaught, brought about his downfall. The queen learnt of a great brown bull in Cooley, County Louth. The chieftain of Louth refused to let Maeve have his bull, so she resolved to get it by force. Secretly, she promised her beautiful daughter in marriage to every leader in her army, and so secured the help of every warrior outside Ulster. The army marched to Kells on the Ulster border and pitched their camp. Maeve sought an interview with the Ulsterman, and, amazed to find him a mere boy, offered him gold and great rewards if he would desist. Cuchulainn refused, but Maeve secured his agreements to fight one of her heroes each day at the ford that lay between, reckoning that this was better than losing 100 every night to Cuchulainn's sling. Day after day Cuchulainn fought Maeve's warriors, overcoming Morrigu, the water goddess, during his fight with the hero Loic, who he still managed to wound mortally. After more such combats and deceitful ploys by Maeve, Cuchulainn mounted his war chariot and hurled himself against the men of Erin. Maeve, with her forces sorely depleted, resorted once again to single combat. She finally forced Cuchulainn's foster brother, Ferdia, to face the Ulsterman, by threatening him with the spells of her druids. After a great fight, in which Ferdia almost proved a match for him, Cuchulainn, badly wounded, emerged as the tragic victor. While he recovered from his wounds, the men of Ulster began to collect themselves, and the two armies faced each other on the plains of Meath. While this great battle was raging, Maeve managed to capture the brown bull of Cooley, which she sent back to Connaught under escort. Eventually, through the intervention of Cuchulainn, the Ulster army defeated Maeve's followers, and they fled back to Cruachan, from whence they had originally set out. Cuchulainn lived on after his incredible feats of prowess, but not for long. Maeve, having bided her time, once again brought an army together to seek revenge. She had no trouble in assembling a great number of warriors, because there was scarcely one who had not a relative slain by the Ulster hero, but it was only by magic that Cuchulainn was eventually pierced by his own spear. With great difficulty, holding his entrails, Cuchulainn tied himself to a big rock by a lake, because as a Gaelic hero, he did not wish to die either sitting or lying. It was standing that he wished to meet his death. His faithful horse protected him as he died, and it was only with a raven alighted on his shoulder that his enemies knew he was dead. The Fianna of Erin. Fiann has a number of definitions, with the most common being foot soldier. Indeed, a distinguishing feature of the Fianna is that they almost always fought on foot. The main function of the Fianna was to maintain and uphold the principles of justice and order within Ireland. The organization was a very honorable institution and considered essential to the welfare of the community at that time. From Samhain, the greatest Celtic festival which celebrated the start of the year and was celebrated on October 31st, to Beltane, which signals the start of summer and was celebrated on May 1st, they were found among the people, whilst in the summer half of the year they engaged in hunting to support themselves. Their method of cooking their catches is well known to primitive. A hole was dug into the ground, inside of which red-hot stones were placed. On top of this was placed venison-wrapped ensage. This was all covered over, and in time the meat was done to a turn. In both seasons they were expected to police the countryside. In order for a man to join the Fianna, he had to meet certain criteria. He had to be versed in the 12 books of poetry, be a man of culture, and pass the number of initiation tests. At the start of the first initiation test, the man had to stand in a pit, dug out to knee depth for him to stand in. His defensive weapons were a shield and a hazel rod. These were used to deflect the spears cast by 9 men from a distance of 9 ridges. These spears were cast simultaneously at the prospective warrior, and if he failed to deflect these weapons, then he was rejected. The second test consisted of a chase through the forest, pursued by armed men. The candidate was to avoid being caught or harmed in any way by the armed men. Indeed, if he had a lock of his braided hair loosened, or if he had broken a branch on the forest floor in his hasty flight, he was rejected. After all that, his hands could not be seen to be shaking at all at the end, or he would have failed. On top of this, the man was obliged to jump over a branch his own head height and stoop below a branch his own knee height, and also be able to run at full speed whilst taking a thorn from his foot at the same time, without breaking his stride. All these tasks seem nigh impossible to achieve, yet they illustrate perfectly the idealistic nature of this group of legends. Finn MacCool and the Salmon of Knowledge. Finn MacCool was the leader of the aforementioned warriors. Although Finn was not the strongest warrior, he was the wisest, kindest, and most trusted of them all. Finn was a true leader of his people, a poet and magician, the pinnacle of achievement for a Celtic warrior. Finn's father, Cumhal, was the leader of the Bicene clan. In a battle with the Morna clan over who should have the right to the leadership of the Fianna of Eire, Cumhal was killed. The Bicene clan were defeated, and their members were dispersed throughout Ireland. Not long after the epic battle, Cumhal's wife Moirin gave birth to the hero himself. In fear of the Morna clan and concerned for her son's safety, Moirin gave Finn to the care of 2 druid women, who took him to the wood of Slieve Bladma to care for him. There he was given excellent training in the ways of the warrior and manhood. A couple of the exercises deemed to be constructive by the women were to throw him into a lake to teach him how to swim, and to put him in on a closed-off field with some hares. They told him to always keep ahead of the hares, no matter what, until the day was over. However, this turned him into a fine young man, fair of appearance, supple of limb, and skilled to boot. So, after spending some time with a troop of poets being taught the way of words, he was put out on his own and went to seek his living in the service of a king. Eventually, he came to the king who had taken his mother for his wife, and fine service he gave. All was well until one day he was playing chess with the king and won 7 games in a row. It was then that the king questioned this fine young man's origins and discovered that he was the son of Cumhal. This displeased him greatly, and Finn, who was then called Damon to conceal his lineage, was asked to leave. He then decided to go into Connaught to seek his father's brother, Crimal. He was on his way there when a magical meeting took place. He came across a woman crying tears of blood. Finn asked her why she cried so, and the woman answered that her only son had just been killed by a champion. Finn vowed that after seeing such a sight that he would follow the champion and slay him. Such sorrow he had not seen before. So he killed the man, and it was the same man who had given his father his first wound in the battle that was to be his last. The champion had on his person a treasure bag made of crane skin that had previously belonged to Finn's father. The bag was full of magical items that could only be used at full tide. The original owners of the bag were Manannán and MacLear, god of the sea, and Lugh of the Long Hand, god of the sun. It was a precious find, making another stage in the boy's oncoming adulthood. Finn found Cremail, now an old man, living in a lonely place with some of the other men of the Fianna. They exchanged stories and conversation, and it was here that Finn left the crane-skin bag. Finn then went on to learn wisdom and poetry from a man named Finnegas who lived by the River Boyne. It is by the side of water that poets gain inspiration, the border between land and sea, neither one world nor the other. It is where the goddesses of poetry may be sought. For 7 years Finnegas had watched for the white red-speckled salmon of knowledge. For in eating this fish a man may have all knowledge. At last the fish did arrive, and Finnegas, rejoicing, gave the fish to Finn to roast, but told him not to eat any of it. However, during the cooking of the salmon, Finn noticed a blister appearing on its skin, and put his thumb onto it to make it disappear. Needless to say, Finn's thumb got badly burnt, and he thrust it into his mouth and onto his wisdom tooth. The boy then gave Finnegas the fish, and after looking at it for a while, he said to Finn, "What is your name, boy?" "It is Damon," Finn replied. "No, it's not," said Finnegas. "It is Finn, that is your name, and the prophecy that someone named Finn will gain the knowledge from the salmon has been fulfilled." The boy then confessed to having inadvertently tasted the fish. From that time on, Finn had the knowledge from the nuts of the 9 hazels that grew beneath the sea. This is how the boy then fulfilled his destiny, and became the man who would be leader of the Fianna of Eire. The Seal People, Selkies. Seal people are said to be cursed with a constant longing for what they do not have. When they are swimming in the water as seals, they yearn to be on land, and when they walk on 2 legs as a human, they long to be in the sea. They can transform from one creature to another by shedding their seal skin, and alternatively, putting it on again. Neil MacCodrum. There is one ancient Celtic story featuring Neil MacCodrum, a Scottish fisherman. He was traveling along the coast when he spotted a group of nude women dancing under the moon. When he stepped on a piece of driftwood, he alerted his presence to the women, who ran over to a pile of furs, slipped them on, and dove into the sea. However, Neil MacCodrum was able to grab the last sister's seal skin before she could put it on. Although she pleaded with him to give it back to her, Neil knew about Selkies from the old tales, and he refused. He hid her seal skin, and the woman was forced to stay with him and become his wife. After some time, she gave Neil a son and a daughter, both sporting webs between their fingers and toes. They grew older as the Selkie woman grew more wistful, though she was a good and obedient wife. One day, the children came running to her with a piece of fur, excited to show her what they had found. Their mother was overjoyed to have her sealskin back. She told her children about the Selkie race, and then warned them that she had to leave them that very night. After Neil had fallen asleep, the Selkie woman took her sealskin to the water's edge. She bade her children farewell, but she told them that they would be able to hear her singing from time to time, as they were half Selkie themselves. Then she slipped into the water, and the children headed home. In the morning, Neil MacCodrum was saddened to hear his children tell him that their mother had returned to the sea. He missed her very much, but his children kept him company for the rest of his life, except for the nights when their mother's song called them to come to her and swim through the waves. There are many Celtic legends that tell of children being born with webbed fingers and toes, but none so famous as the MacCodrum siblings. The Secret of Roan. The Secret of Roan. In 1994, a movie was made about a young girl who goes to live with her grandparents in Donegal, Ireland. Many years before, her brother had been carried out to sea in a cradle, and one of her relatives believes that he is being watched over by the seals. It turns out that there is a legend that one of the girl's ancestors had married a Selkie. The Secret of Roan Inish is an enchanting tale inspired by the gentlest of the fanatical creatures in Celtic mythology. Some of the legends say that Selkies can only transform from a seal to human once a year on Midsummer's Eve. Others insist that it is every 9th night. The seal people, once upon the shore, were said to have danced in the moonlight. They are very gentle souls, contrasting with the usually hostile mythological creatures that come from the seas. Selkies were also very beautiful. The women made very good, docile wives, if their husband could manage to hide their seal skin. The male seal people had the power to seduce human women, especially those that were unhappy in their marriage. If a woman cried 7 tears into the sea during high tide, the Selkie would come ashore, shed his seal skin, and love her. Sometimes these stories were told to explain why a woman had an affair or ran away from her family. There are also legends about women going missing at sea. It was said that her Selkie lover had taken her down to his home underwater. Shrouded in mystery, there is a debate about the origin of the legends surrounding Selkies. There are suggestions that long ago, Spaniards had shipwrecked and washed ashore, and that their dark hair reminded the people of seals. Another story says that seal people are really Finns that travel in kayaks and wear furs. Some people have said that Selkies are fallen angels that dropped into the sea and transformed. There is even a suggestion that after Christianity swept through the lands, the seal people were meant to represent those in purgatory, caught between 2 worlds. One of the most popular theories is that they were formed from the souls of drowned people who were granted 1 night each year to return to their human form and dance upon the shore of the sea. Selkie speculation. It is widely speculated that, like many myths from all cultures, tales of Selkies were created as a way to explain the unexplainable. There were children sometimes born with webbed fingers and toes, faces resembling that of a seal, and sometimes scaly skin that smelled fishy. Today, there are scientific names for all of the above. Webbed toes is a hereditary condition called syndactyly. Seal faces result from the rare medical phenomenon anecyphily, and scaly skin probably existed from ichthyosis, a genetic skin disorder. Stories of the seal people could also have been imagined as ways to account for women that did not seem to fit in with the rest of society. They share similarities with sirens, mermaids, and mermen in other cultures. However, for people that lived on the edge of the seas and depended on the water and its gifts for survival, it seems natural for them to have believed legends of beautiful, mysterious creatures that shed their shiny seal coats to become humans for a night of dancing under the moon. This has been Celtic Mythology, Irish Myths and Ancient Folklore from the British Isles, written by Bernard Hayes, narrated by Zachary Dillon Brown. Copyright 2018 by Bernard Hayes. Production copyright 2018 by Bernard Hayes.